Hey, good evening, everybody. Y'all know me. I'm Keith Shelton. Uh, I'm just glad to be able to be here every Sunday evening. Welcome. And my sidekick and co pilot and manager and runner of everything, there she is, the beautiful one and only, my wife, Sonara. Hey, sweetie.
Hey.
First of all, let's say we're glad everybody's here that's joining us this evening. We're going to again ask you please subscribe, like, and share. We would like to think that what the Lord puts on our hearts that we present to you every week is worthy of your attention and your time, and that it is a message about um, things that universally would apply to anybody's life. And so please share with those you think would benefit from what we're presenting every week. But we do thank y'all for your prayers, your support, and thank y'all for being here tonight. Sonar, how we're going to kick off? Well, first thing we got to do is we got to tell everybody that Sonar has assembled one place to find all of our prior podcasts. Now, Sonar, I'll let you do the commentary, but here's all I'm going to say. There's a lot of times when we will make a comment or we will make a reference to something that you may not fully understand or may not appreciate the significance of it if you haven't seen the prior podcast. So we're going to encourage you, now that Snar's got them all in one place, if you haven't, please go back and start watching them from the beginning. Now, boy, did we start off rough. Snar.
They say on YouTube, when you watch all those tutorials on how to do this, they say you got to start ugly. You got to start ugly, but you just have to start. And so that's what we have done. And we may still be ugly, but we're not as ugly as we were. And the thing is, though, is if you're watching these studies that we're doing now, and I'm not saying that you can't get something out of it just watching this, but if you would go back and watch, I would say, if you're really pressed for time, if you would go back and watch episodes 2 through maybe 6, 7, wouldn't you say, Keith? Those first ones, you're going to have a frame of reference that you've never had before when you study the Bible, because now that those of us who have done that have that, when we read these things, it kind of goes without saying, and we don't always talk about it. We can't go back every single time and point back to Genesis, but that is what you need to go back and do and try to get caught up. Now, I have put a link in the comments here and also in the description. So either one of those links will take you to the playlist on YouTube so that you can catch up or go back and watch some that you've missed, or just the first ones that you missed, because I can't tell you how important those first ones are. Keith, you can say something about that if you want to.
No, I agree with you, sweetie. There was a lot of foundational things, a lot of things that, we found out people didn't know. And it's like, nobody had ever told us this. Nobody had ever shown us this. Nobody ever told us where that came from. Nobody ever told us what the foundation for that was. And so, first several are basically foundational, and they'll give you a good basis for watching the rest of them.
I think so too. Yeah. We haven't gone back and, talked about a lot of that, but, it's hard. It's all so connected. But if you don't have that beginning of understanding, I think that you're going to miss out. You're going to miss out on a lot of this. And, you and I, when we learned some of this, we said, we need to go back and reread the entire Bible. We missed things. We didn't understand things. And you and I both talked about this. We ask our Sunday school teachers. We asked, elders. We asked people that were around us, and bless their heart, they didn't know. They didn't know the answer to that. And they didn't try to tell us wrong or anything. It's just they did not know. And I think there are things we know that we couldn't have known then. So if you could go back and watch those.
Yep. Well, let's kick off tonight, sweetie. All right, we're still in 2 Samuel. Tonight we're covering chapters 8 through 12, and we're still studying the life and kingship of King David. And over the last couple of episodes, plus the homework we've sent you, I think, you've heard commentaries, you've heard church leaders, you've heard others, including us, say that, the historicity of David, it could be a warm, fuzzy feeling, just like, the stories of King Arthur and the Round Table, from English literature, from your 12th grade English lit courses. If that's all you're looking for is a warm, fuzzy feeling. But over the last 2 or 3 lessons, I think we've made the point as to why it's so important that you have a true understanding that King David was real. He was a real person. His kingship was real. The Bible was truthful when it would tell us things about King David and the way King David interacted with God and God interacted with King David. And so it's a case of, I think we've covered that in the last couple of sessions. So where are we? Well, no mystery. What's the next one there, sweetie? We're still in the Holy Land. If you zoom in a little bit or put a pause right there, you'll see you'll see the Sea of Galilee, and you'll see the Dead Sea. You'll see the Mediterranean on the right. We are in the Holy Land. We're still in the Holy Land. And it's going to mean what's on the map will continue to mean things as we go along. Okay. All right. Well, when are we? Well, we're still talking about 1,000 years before Christ. This is about the time of King David. The latter part of that century was King Saul. Then David comes along right around the turn of that century. So we're still talking in the 1000 BC time period for King David. How did we finish the last time? Well, here's how we finished the last time. Chapter 5, Jerusalem went from a nothing dot on a map to the eternal holy city of God, called the City of Truth. And I encourage you to read 1 Chronicles 11, 4 through 9 to get to see a little further illumination on that. Chapter 6, David set an example of a personal relationship with God that begat the reclaiming of the nations for Yahweh. And we could not emphasize enough why that was so important to us Gentiles. Okay. Now, I'm going to encourage you to read 1 Chronicles chapter 16, especially David's praise psalm in the 1 Chronicles rendition of what would be the 2 Samuel chapter 6 counterpart. And then chapter 7, the unilateral, unconditional covenant with King David of a future and forever heir and king to sit on the throne of David. Now, I'm going to remind you, where is the throne of David right now? There's not one. Jesus is at the right hand of the throne of the Father. The throne of King David, it's a reference to the political throne. That is still to come. But all the promises that give us salvation, the promises of where we're going to spend eternity, things like that, all of those revolve around the promise of King Jesus sitting on the throne of David. Okay? Now, here's what I put in here, and I'm not going to read these word for word for you. As we've told you before, italicized and highlighted is the gospel according to Keith and Sonar, but we are hitting high spots. Upon the throne of David and over his kingdom to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. Isaiah, Then Ezekiel, they shall dwell there, they, their children, their children's children, forever. And my servant David shall be their prince forever. When you see this, you'll see these time periods on here. These are after the literal, actual life of King David. So whenever you see a reference like that, it's not talking about David himself. It's talking about the Messiah. Okay. Go on to the next one. So where you got Jeremiah 588 BC, Jeremiah 588 BC. Go to number 3. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. That's Daniel 539 BC. The children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God, and David their king. They shall fear the Lord and his goodness in the latter days. That's Hosea. That's around 755 to 725 BC. Okay, this is well after King David, but it's prophesied. It was solidified in the prophets. When you're reading the New Testament and all the things of the I won't say all of them, but a lot of the interactions between the Pharisees and Jesus were hinged on the fact that the Jewish leaders of Jesus' day knew about all these prophecies. Okay? I have sworn to David, my servant, I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all generations. Psalms 89. I have sworn by my holiness, and I will not lie to David. His line will continue forever. His throne will be established forever. That's further on in Psalms 89. The Jewish leaders of Jesus' day knew these things. Now, summary of 2 Samuel chapter 8. David defeats Philistia. David defeats Moab. David defeats Zobah in Syria. Toi, the king of Hamath, concedes without a fight. Now, the key takeaway from chapter 8 that ties in with the homework video that you were sent, David became famous after return from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. It's talking about the Jordan Rift Valley near the Dead Sea. And that valley also runs out of the Dead Sea down to the Gulf of Aqaba. He put garrisons throughout Edom, and all the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. Now, do y'all remember from last time where Edom is? And from the maps, Edom is south of the Dead Sea and southeast of the Dead Sea. Well, there were garrisons all around the Dead Sea. And this is one of those things. I just love what you interject there, sweetie. This is just more of how Satan's attack on our Bible it's just being blown away. Just being blown away. God is not putting up with it. And thank the good Lord for that. All right, summary, chapter 9. And just so you'll know, chapter 9. I
think we should say here, Keith, that we're not going to try to cover these chapters actually today. We're going to summarize them. And if you can give like a pre-summary, it's because these chapters describe what? They describe, the expansion of the kingdom and.
Well, that's what chapter 8 did. Chapter 8 described the expansion of the kingdom, the solidification of King David's hold on what was the great expansion of the nation of Israel in that day. That's what chapter 8 was. Chapter 9, David is actually, let's just say he's playing good politics. Remember, King Saul, for some reason, was a fan favorite in the northern tribes. And so he's reached out after he's well settled in his kingdom, in his palace in the city of David. And he's kind of in a lull period of military campaigns. He reaches out and tries to see if there's any of King Saul's descendants still alive. Now, in a typical manner, you would be very suspicious of that, because remember what we've said before in 3 or 4 sessions back. It was a very common practice that when one king of one country or one nation defeated a king of another nation, big or small, it was usually the practice that that king, his wife and kids, brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, if they weren't forced into slavery, they were killed. They were exterminated. And why was that? It was to remove the actual object of affection, attention, and allegiance of the people to minimize the chances that the people might later rise up and use that one person or a couple of people who were left alive to be the person or persons to rally around to throw off the king that had just won the victory.
I'm going to say that real quick. They killed them so they wouldn't come back to haunt them.
That's a good play on words there, but yes, that is exactly right. They killed them so they wouldn't come back to haunt them.
Okay.
And so the fact that David was reaching out to basically say, are there any of King Saul's descendants left that he might honor them? Well, David, they could have looked on that with suspicion. But, if you studied how David conducted himself, how David tried to stay true to the Lord's calling, that he would not do anything to harm King Saul. And by all means, he was let's just call him a blood brother to Saul's son, Jonathan. He loved Jonathan. Jonathan loved him. They were blood brothers when they were growing up. And so, you might kind of wonder why is David doing this? But if you knew the history, you those fears and concerns would probably be allayed. In any event, a servant came forward named Ziba, and he told David that there was a son of Jonathan who was still alive, the crippled son. And if y'all remember a couple of sessions ago, I told y'all when we first introduced him to remember the name, that he would show up again. And Ziba did tell him that he was still alive. So David declared that all of what formerly belonged to King Saul was going to be given to Ziba for safekeeping for Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth was brought to the palace and treated as one of David's family members. And so Mephibosheth, his fortunes were growing because Ziba and Ziba's family were in charge of the estate, and they continued to work it. They continued to, plant crops and raise vineyards and things like that, whatever was generating income. And they would continue to grow the estate, but Mephibosheth didn't have to worry about anything because King David was treating him as a member of the family and was feeding him, giving him room and board in the palace, and treating him as if he was a family member of King David's. Okay? Now, here's the key takeaway. Now, when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. Then David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, here's your servant. So David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan, your father's sake, and will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather, and you shall eat bread at my table continually. And this he did for quite a long time. Okay, summary of chapter 10. And the counterpart of this is 1 Chronicles chapter 19. A new king came to rule over a month.
Keith, can you explain why we have these parallels in other chapters like Chronicles? It kind of repeats the same thing that this chapter 10 does. What is that all about?
Well, it really doesn't repeat it. It does repeat parts of it. And that's why when we get to Chronicles, we're going to be covering that as well. And we won't necessarily be repeating ourselves. We'll cover stuff that's not covered in 2 Samuel, but they are parallels. Let's just call them parallels. They're They don't tell the same thing, but there are certain portions where they are very close. Very
Well,
close.
I mean, would I be wrong to say that Chronicles, by the word that it is, like say the Chronicles of Narnia, Chronicles are a record, a recording, a written record of something that happened. So it makes sense that in the Chronicles of Kings, which Kings kept chronicles, that you would see some of the things that happen in other chapters. So that's why you feel like it's repetitive, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And in reality, there are portions of Second Samuel that you will find in First Kings, and
in Chronicles, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but then there are a good number of things that are in Chronicles that are not in Second Samuel.
Right.
So
okay.
They're not exactly the same, but they do track the same.
But that's why you see the same stories sometimes in different chapters like that.
Exactly. And like we said last time, the fact that David was told he was not going to be he was told he was not going to be able to build the temple for God. That's not in Second Samuel. But it is found in First Chronicles in the same rendering of the events with Nathan. Okay.
Okay.
Now let's do the summary of chapter 10, because we're really wanting to get to chapters 11 and 12. A new king comes to rule over Ammon, and David makes a good faith overture to the new king. You got to remember now, David's already defeated the army of the old king, but David's overtures rebuffed when his envoys are humiliated by having their beards half shaved and their cloaks cut off above the waist. That's a case of whatever happened to him could not be seen as anything other than a poke in the eye of King David. So here's what happens. They're going, okay, we've done this. We know David's going to be mad about it. Let's get ready to fight. So the Ammonites hire Syrians as mercenary soldiers to fight David's army. Now they're going to have to do it alone, but the Syrians were known as more fierce warriors than the Ammonites were, and so they hired them to come help fight alongside them. All right, Joab. Who is Joab? Do we remember who Joab is? Joab is the commander-in-chief of David's army. And he is, what was he? Brother-in-law? We'll have to go back and look. Anyway, he's related to David. So Joab took the best of the Hebrews and went against the Syrian mercenaries. Abishai, Joab's brother, took the remainder and went against the Ammonites. Joab and Abishai were both victorious. The king of Syria was offended by the defeat of his soldiers by the Hebrews, and he gathered the remainder of his forces and went to battle with David on the east side of the Jordan River. They were soundly defeated. They made peace and became a servant nation to Israel. Now, Sonara, I don't know how far back. Let's see. If we could go back to the map, going back, right there. All right, if you could zoom in on that. Okay, the Sea of Galilee, if you find the Sea of Galilee and you look to the northeast, all of that is, it includes Bashan, but that is known as that's where the Syrians came from, all the way up to the Euphrates River. And so in that area between the Sea of Galilee and the Euphrates River is where the battles took place. So now we can go back to where we were. Well, you know what? I didn't realize this. Go to the very next slide. I forgot that one. There's it. All right, you see the Arameans? All of that to the northeast of the Sea of Galilee, all that is where the Syrians came from. They are Arameans. And the king of Aramea, the king of Syria, rather, who had his army defeated because they were fighting with the Ammonites, he reached all the way to the other end of his kingdom up by the Euphrates River and pulled the rest of his army down from up there to come against Israel. In any event, what happened to them? They got defeated. Okay? So that brings us through chapters 8, 9, and 10. And here's an outline of the second book of Samuel. And we are, you see highlighted there, David and Bathsheba. That's going to be chapters 11 and 12. So this is where we're going to concentrate. The sin of adultery, covetousness. It happened in the spring of the year at the time when kings go out to battle. David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. They destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah, modern day Amman, Jordan. But David remained at Jerusalem. This was not a normal way of doing things. The kings almost always were with their armies, mainly for the reason that, victories, the king wanted to be able to take credit for it. So this was very unusual that David was still in Jerusalem. And, like we've said, that old seed war, Satan decided to take advantage of it. So let's read verse 2. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. David sent and inquired about the woman, and somebody said, "Is this not Bathsheba?" In First Chronicles, she's called Bathshua, the daughter of Eliam, and in First Chronicles, he's called Amiel, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, so she sent and told David and said, "I am with child." Now, before I go to this next verse, I want to tell you, there are a lot of commentators that when you look at the totality of all the scriptures that refer to Bathsheba and who she was, how she conducted herself, things that happened to her, for her, and around her, they are of the opinion that Bathsheba wasn't blameless in this tryst with King David. Okay. And I haven't dug into it. Snarr hadn't dug into it. We just took note of it. So we're not saying one way or the other. The fact of the matter is God wasn't trying to make an example out of her. He ended up making an example out of King David. So
it doesn't diminish what King David did, no matter what happened. It does not diminish what he did.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Then David sent to Joab, saying, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah had come to him, I'm going to read it without commentary.
So this is the husband. This is the husband.
This is
he sent for the husband. Okay.
Yeah, and you got to remember the husband was the husband was, number one, he was probably well known to David, or at least David's palace court, and he apparently was well up in the military. He was not like a buck private. Okay,
all right.
Now, and Joab sent Uriah to David, and when Uriah had come to him, David asked how Joab was doing and how the people were doing and how the war prospered. This is just some of the indication of why you would think David would be asking this of the lowest soldier in the field. He's asking of somebody who, would, be doing his job, but he would also be, have his own head on a swivel and he would know what's going on to the left, on to the right, behind him, in front of him, because it's obvious David treats him that way. Okay. Go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah departed from the king's house, and a gift of food from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his Lord, and did not go down to his house. So when they told David, saying, Uriah did not go down to his house, David said to Uriah, did you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, the ark in Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my Lord are encamped in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Uriah basically taking the position, look, I don't deserve a privilege like that. We're in the middle of a major battle, and I got my soldiers. They're in hardship. All in
at least,
hardship.
I wouldn't feel right about it. I wouldn't feel right about being comfortable and getting to see my wife when all the men that are fighting
that
with me
I fight
are
with,
suffering.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Wait. Then David said to Uriah, wait here today also, and tomorrow I will let you depart. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Now when David called him, he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. And at evening he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his Lord, but he did not go down to his house. Now,
He thought if he could get enough liquor in him, he'd go home. See his
exactly.
wife. That's
exactly.
terrible. That's awful.
Exactly. I mean, that go back to the prior one there, sweetie. That's where the deceitfulness and false witness was. I mean, he won't. Why was he so insistent that Uriah go to his house and sleep with his wife?
Because his wife is pregnant, and he has not known his wife in a long time, and David is trying to cover that up.
Exactly.
And you can see how intentional it is.
Exactly. He wasn't just trying to be nice to Uriah. So next one. All right. In the morning, it happened that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. And he wrote in the letter saying, set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest, the Hebrew word there means fiercest part of the battle, and retreat from him. In other words, you put him and some guys that he's fighting with way at the front, and then you bring everybody else backwards, that he may be struck down and die. That's so.
He's gone over the edge.
He's gone over the edge.
He's gone over the edge.
So it was while Joab seized the city that he assigned Uriah to a place where he knew there were valiant men. Then the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the people of the servants of David fell, and Uriah the Hittite died also. Then Joab sent and told David all the things concerning the war, and charged the messenger, saying, when you have finished telling the matters of the war to the king, if it happens that the king's wrath rises, and he says to you, why did you approach so near to the city when you fought? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck Abimelech, the son of Jerubesheth, that's another name for Gideon? Was it not a woman who cast a piece of a millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Tebez? Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, hey, King David, your servant Uriah the Hittite's dead also.
Yeah, when we were talking about this morning, we were saying, he's going to say, why'd you do that? Haven't we learned anything through battle? You don't get that close to a wall. And then he's going to say, then you're going to tell him, well, the Hittite's dead, because wasn't that what he told him to do?
Exactly. And that was the main.
So bad. It wasn't just him. It was the others that were with him that he pushed into that, so that he could get killed. But anyway.
It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing. All right, next one. The sin is complete, but David is unfazed. So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent by him. And the messenger said to David, surely the men prevailed against us and came out to us in the field. Then we drove them back as far as the entrance of the gate, The archers shot from the wall at your servants, and some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Then David said to the messenger, thus you shall say to Joab, do not let this thing displease you. And I'm going to stop here and make a point about what the actual Hebrew word is. It's re'ah, and it basically means be evil in your sight. Excuse me, the English translation is displeased, like, well, I'm not happy with you. Well, no, the actual Hebrew word is much stronger than just I'm not happy with you. Okay.
So do not let this thing be evil in your sight would be a way to say that.
Don't,
if you were doing the Hebrew. Mm-hmm.
David's basically trying to tell Joab, don't judge me.
Yeah.
Don't judge me. For the sword devours one as well as another. Okay, so Uriah died. So the guy standing next to him. That's basically what David's attitude is here. He didn't want Joab to judge him for what he knows that Joab knows that he did.
Yeah.
Let's see. For the sword devours one as well as another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it. So encourage him. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when her mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased, again, this is the English translation, but the Hebrew word is the same. Re'ah.
Was evil.
But the thing that David had done was evil in the eyes of the Lord. Okay.
Like, you don't even have to say it's evil. If it just says it displeased the Lord, that's bad enough. Especially now, this is David, a man after God's own heart.
Oh my goodness. All right. I want to remind you of what the 10 commandments were. The first 4 have to do with not just any man or any group of men, any people. It has to do with how the nation of Israel was to deal with Jehovah God. The last 6 were for how the people of Israel were to deal with each other. And as what you have just seen, that the way, as far as Sonar and I can figure, David broke at least 5 of the 6, if not all 6, by being ruthless.
There's no other way to look at it. Murder, adultery, steal. He stole a man's wife. Bear false witness. I mean, he lied.
Wasn't truthful.
Covet. He certainly coveted. He knew that, that was another man's wife. So he definitely broke those.
He lusted after before he.
I even think that you could make the case for he didn't honor his father and mother by his actions. But, but at least 5. At least 5.
At least 5 of the 6. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
David hears a parable from Nathan the prophet. Then the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, there were 2 men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb, which he had bought and nourished, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It ate of his own food and drank from his own cup, and lay in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man, who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring man who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. So David's anger was greatly aroused against the man, and he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die. The Hebrew word there means deserves death. And he shall restore 4-fold the lamb, because he did this thing and because he had no pity. All right, that starts us off from chapter 12. What's the next one there, sweetie?
I think that's it right there.
All right. The taking of property was not a capital offense under Mosaic law. So why did David say that he deserved to die? Well, if David's heart, as Nathan related the parable to him, was touched by the, let's call it a picture that Nathan painted, that this was a favored pet lamb. And then if David viewed the taking and killing of a family pet lamb as especially heinous, he might argue it was akin to kidnapping. No pun intended, but that would then equal the capital punishment, the punishment of deserving death. Okay? But now look at this. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it's an ox or a donkey or sheep, he shall restore double.
That's if he hadn't already eaten it with the wayfaring stranger.
Yes, but if you remember, David, if you, is it in the, yeah, it's in the one just before. Go back to the one just before that.
It says he prepared the man's ewe lamb. It was his pet.
Yeah.
Like a member of the family. We all have had pets that are like, members of the family.
All right, look at verse 6. And he shall restore 4-fold for the lamb, because he did this thing and because he had no pity. Well, where did that come from? Now go back to the one we were just on. It comes from Exodus 22, 1 through 4. It's in the law. It was in the Mosaic law.
So David was making a ruling based on the law.
Yeah.
He was making a correct ruling. Yes.
But here's the thing. He didn't know Nathan was telling him a parable. He thought Nathan was telling him about a factual situation.
Sure.
And because he wasn't looking at this from a intellectual standpoint, he was sitting here literally thinking he needs to make a ruling here. This is really making him mad that this rich guy did this to this poor fella.
He couldn't see couldn't see the significance.
No, he couldn't.
But then Nathan said to David,
"You are the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your keeping, and gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that hadn't been enough, I'd have given you that much more. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight?" I'm pausing here to make the point, y'all. That's why the rendering, the Hebrew words, that were translated into displeased, well, I'm not happy with you. No, the Hebrew word literally was actually calling it evil. It was evil what he did. And this follow-up scripture confirms the prior scripture, okay? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house. Don't forget that phrase. Because you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor. And he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. For you did it secretly, but I'm going to pay you back before all of Israel, before the sun.
We had a comment, and I thought this was a good point that Donna made, that David was a tender of sheep. He was a shepherd, and they were near and dear to his heart. And so the fact that somebody would have chosen, would have stolen somebody's pet sheep and eaten it probably did anger him, and for a minute he didn't realize the significance, I don't think, of all that.
Well, you think of all the sheep that Jesse had, that his sons, as they grew up, tended to the sheep. I mean, one after the other would have favorites, and they would make pets out of some of the sweetest and cutest ones, and that sort of thing. David had pets that made pets out of some of his sheep. So yeah,
right.
That was an
That's a very
excellent
good
point. Excellent point, Donna.
Yeah.
All right.
And but anyway, don't forget this, that you did it secretly, but I will do this before all Israel before the sun. This is Nathan speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, go ahead, honey.
Now, the sword will never depart from your house. I will raise up adversity against you from your own house. David was going to pay a heavy price for his sins.
I always thought, we talked about this morning. I used to think that when they were talking about the sword, that, and this may be partly true as well, but that David had killed so many, in battle and all that. And I thought at first that maybe that's what it was. But the more I read this, the more I realize that this sword, this misuse of the sword, is what God's talking about here. And I've talked about before as well, and this may not be the perfect place to bring it up, but in the 10 commandments where it says thou shalt not kill, that word is not actually kill, it is thou shalt not murder.
Take innocent life is what the actual meaning is.
Because people find such conflict with the fact that, God says, go wipe out these people, kill every man, woman, and child. We've studied some of these things in some of our past lessons and the whys behind that. But then they say, how can he be like that? And then he said, thou shalt not kill. He said, thou shalt not murder. But you can't call what he did to Bathsheba's husband anything but murder. Exactly. I mean, he may not have done it with his own hand, but he may as well have done it with his own hand.
He knew what he was trying for, and he accomplished it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Now, the two phrases in red, that came from Nathan. So here's the question we're going to ask. How many sons did David end up losing over the rest of his lifetime?
4.
What was the Mosaic law about when you stole something? What did you have to replace?
The lambs. It was 4.
4-fold. That's right. All right. Now, Absalom will sin with David's concubines. That's part of what Nathan prophesied was going to happen.
And Absalom is, remind everybody, Keith.
David's son, one of David's other sons.
Right. Well, how did we get there?
Don't know. All right. David is convicted in his heart and he repents. So David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. Now, in the Old Testament, there were many times when any one particular sin God may judge, and God may judge a person should die. Okay. In this particular case, he didn't say he was not going to make David suffer earthly consequences, but he did not judge him to death right then. However, because by this deed you have given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also who is born to you shall surely die. Then Nathan departed to his house. Well, here's the point where we can ask, each other and all of our listeners and viewers, what happens when we sin, when we carry the badge of God?
Because of our deeds that we do, we give God's enemies great occasion to blaspheme him.
Yeah.
And we have to all be guilty of that. And I wish we could all be perfect, but we're not going to be. No. But that is humbling to think about, we're causing people to stumble, when we fail.
Exactly.
Luckily, God's arm is not so short that he can't reach down and save anybody. So I'm comforted by that.
All right. Well, David pays for his sin with earthly consequences. The child, Bathsheba, bore to David, ends up dying. However, toward the end of the passage, it talks about David weeping and crying and fasting and being in constant prayer, trying to save the life of that child. the child does end up dying. And this is where we find ourselves in verse 22. And he said, while the child was alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, who can tell whether the Lord's going to be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he's dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. This is the basis of what almost universally every Christian scholar will talk about. This is where the age of accountability comes in, that innocent children, before they reach the age of accountability. Now, do you know what age that is? Do you know what age that is, Sonara?
I do not.
Does anybody else know?
And I don't know if it's the same for every child.
Exactly. It's not. But there is the concept of an innocent child is going to be saved. I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me. David's on the earth. David is looking forward to the time when David will pass away and join his child in heaven. Okay, so that's where the doctrine of the age of accountability comes from. Saul, we're talking about Saul, not King Saul, but we're talking about the apostle Saul, who became Paul, and I should have made that clear, seems to confirm this in Romans chapter 7, 8, and 9. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. If you don't know about the law, you can't be measured against it. Verse 9, I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. Now, what is he talking about there? Paul is talking about I was alive apart from the law. When I didn't know about the law, when I was a little bitty child, whatever age that was, when I had no notion of what was right and what was wrong, I was alive. But when the commandment came, in other words, when I came to know about the beginnings of the law, then sin came alive in me because I knew right and wrong. It might have only been to, obey your mom and dad. That's probably surely the first commandment that any child would learn is, don't touch that. It's going to burn you. Don't go out that door. Those horses will run over you, whatever. When that child knows, if he listens to his mom and dad, he's going to be blessed. But if he doesn't mind his mom and daddy, he could get hurt. Well, he's learning right and wrong. So that's the point that we're making here. So when he starts learning right and wrong in whatever form, then he's going to be judged by that. And that's why Paul said, and I died. He didn't mean he died physically. He meant he died under the law, because that's what the law leads to. It leads to death. Okay? That's what he had just said in verse 8.
I'm still confused, but okay. I understand what you're saying, though. I'm still confused by that. Okay.
Well, my story didn't explain.
You did the best you could. You did the best you could. Okay.
All right. Then David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went in to her and lay with her. She bore a son, and he called his name Solomon. Now the Lord loved him, and he sent word by the hand of Nathan the prophet. So he called his name Jedediah, meaning beloved of the Lord, because of the Lord. And then Joab continued the siege of Rabbah, capital of Ammon. Remember what I told you Rabbah was? Rabbah is historic Ammon, Jordan. Okay? And paused long enough to allow David to come and complete the victory. Literally, the scripture says Joab wanted David to get the credit.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even read that. I'm
Yeah,
just now reading that.
Yeah, and David
he paused long enough to allow David to rush in and take the credit.
Yeah, there you go, to take the credit. The crown jewels and other plunder from the victory were taken back to Jerusalem, and the people of Ammon were forced into servitude. All right, here's what we want you to know about this, because it's important. If you remember, Bathsheba was the daughter of Eliam. She was married to Uriah.
She was.
Well, David got rid of Uriah, And guess who the grandfather of Bathsheba was? Ahithophel. Well, we haven't got there yet, but Absalom, we did touch on it, that Absalom basically shamed David by taking his concubines as wives. Well, guess who was the trusted advisor of Absalom?
Grandpa.
Grandpa. Grandpa never forgave David for what he did to his son-in-law, his grandson-in-law, and his granddaughter. Now,
Yeah.
like I said, some people want to, they want to put a little bit of the blame on Bathsheba, but Grandpa didn't. Grandpa felt like she was taken advantage of, and he was going to do all he could to get back at David. So just wanted to bring that point up to you.
Right.
Now, here's how we're going to end up the session tonight. David, a man after God's own heart. Where did that come from? That came from 1 Samuel 13 through 14. Look at what we've got in underlined and italicized. The Lord had sought a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be the prince over his people. He's talking about David. Samuel is talking to Saul, telling him that a man that God has sought after his own heart, which is David, is going to take his place. That's where the phrase, a man after God's own heart, comes from. All right. Now, what can we learn? The stories of the Old Testament saints relate to us something basic about the gospel. The good news is not, trust me and be freed from your humanity. Getting saved does not mean that you all of a sudden become perfect. You are translated into perfection, but in this earthly body, we are still flesh and blood. We are still temptable by Satan. Okay? What is the good news we can take from this is that the Lord committed himself to take us as he finds us, deal with our sins and our sin nature, and to declare us to be like his son. That's how it works. Not that we will ever be good enough to earn our way into our place in heaven. Okay? Now, Psalm 51. How many of you knew that King David wrote Psalm 51 in response to his conviction about his sin that he had committed with Bathsheba? Okay, go back and read Psalms 51. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. There's a transformation here in what David's saying. Okay, begging for mercy. He's admitting it's going to take abundant mercy to blot out my transgressions, cleanse me from my sins. Isn't that what you hear when the invitation's given in church services? Be cleansed and etc. All right. For I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. In other words, y'all hear me a lot of times say, I don't care how much you try to put a formula on God. Here's the most simple one you will ever need to remember. God is God and I ain't. If you will never forget that phrase and you will always apply it, it will keep you humble. God is God and I ain't. All I'm doing is I am reminding myself of the right relationship of a father and a child. The child acknowledges he's not his daddy. He will never be his daddy. He will never replace his daddy. We are dependent on our daddy. Okay? Against you, you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. David's saying, God, you're God. I'm not. If you thought you needed to judge me, you have every right to, because you're perfect, you're pure, you're holy. I'm far from that. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in truth in the inward being. And we're fixing to look at some more verses elsewhere in the Old Testament that'll bring this point to light. And you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Isn't there an old hymn? That's the phrase we sing, whiter than snow.
I think there's more than one, but yeah.
I believe there is. I believe there is. Let me hear joy and gladness, that the bones that you have broken and rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right, meaning steadfast, spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. What's the next one? All right, this is the rest of Psalms 51. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners shall be converted to you. Deliver me from the guilt of bloodshed, O God, the God of my salvation, and my tongue shall sing aloud of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall show forth your praise. For you do not desire sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. These, O God, you will not despise. Do good in your good pleasure to Zion. Build the walls of Jerusalem. Then you shall be pleased with the sacrifices of righteousness, with burnt offering and whole burnt offering. Then they shall offer bulls on your altar. That's Psalms 51, 13 through 19.
I just want to say again, a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart. Let that sink in a little bit.
You're God, I'm not. Here's Micah. Micah, for those of you Micah was very concerned that God had turned his back on the nation of Israel. Micah was so woeful, so worrisome, so distraught over the travails that the nation of Israel were going through at the time. So here's what he says. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? Well, you know where that was going to get him. You know what God said about child sacrifice. But then verse 8, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Justice, mercy, and humility. Walk humbly with your God.
In a personal relationship with God. Not one built on, what did you say, did you recite this prayer or that prayer or this incantation or that incantation? Did you burn seven bulls? Did you burn 3 lambs? He's not saying that's exactly what he's saying. No. What I'd rather have is a personal relationship with you. That's what he tells Micah. This is Psalm 32. And for those of you who may not have known this, there are many who say that Psalm 32 was written at the same time that David wrote Psalm 51. Blessed is he whose transgressions is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones grew old through my groaning all the day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was turned into the drought of summer. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I have not hidden. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. For this cause everyone who is godly shall pray to you in a time when you may be found. Surely in a flood of great waters they shall not come near him. You are my hiding place. You shall preserve me from trouble. You shall surround me with songs of deliverance. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will guide you with my eye. Do not be like the horse or like the mule, which have no understanding, which must be harnessed with bit and bridle, else they will not come near you. Many sorrows shall be to the wicked, but he who trusts in the Lord, mercy shall surround him. Be glad in the Lord and rejoice, you righteous, and shout for joy, all you upright in heart. Now, you've seen this slide before. It all goes back to Genesis 3:15. So I'm not going to belabor that one. In Genesis 3:15, Satan knew all he had to do was concentrate on humankind. And then in Genesis 22:18, Satan was able to zero in on the nation that would come after Abraham. And then after Genesis 49:10, he knew all he had to do was concentrate on the tribe of Jacob. And then 2 Samuel 7, 1 Chronicles 17, with David, all he had to do was zero in on the lineage of David. And all this is going to play out. I cannot wait till we get into the New Testament, because you're going to see so much of what we have been studying. It's going to be so plain, it's unbelievable. All right, and this is the last slide of the evening. We're going to quit. We're almost right on time. This is the extent of the nation of Israel in the time of King David, expanded under Solomon, and this is it. Okay? I sure hope y'all learned something tonight. Hope it was beneficial. Hope we covered some points that you may not have thought of, that the Lord may not have taught you about yet. And we thank y'all for joining us. Sonara?
We do, and we want to say that no matter how many videos we watch or how many other, commentators we study, that it never hits us as hard as it does when we read the Word, when we read it for ourselves. So we encourage everybody to go and read their Bibles for themselves. And don't forget that I have put a link in the comments here in this podcast, and also in the description, to a playlist of all the Invisible Things podcasts that have happened so far. So if there's any problem with anybody getting to anything, please let me know. But I think that may help you share that with other people if you want to. And again, we encourage you, any new listeners, that if you're listening to this tonight, that you go back and hear, like, at least podcast 1 is really, really shaky. And we were just trying to tell everybody why we were here, but 2 through maybe 7 or 8, would get you get you started. So go back and listen to those if you can. So
yeah. And we want to thank y'all for being faithful and joining us tonight. We thank y'all for the comments tonight. We had a whole bunch of comments. We appreciate them. Thank you for your prayers. It's your encouragement. As long as y'all let us know you're getting something out of what we're doing, then we're certainly motivated to keep digging, keep plugging away, keep finding things that you probably didn't know. And I can assure you, we've told you this before, so it's just a repeat. It's unbelievable how much Sonara and I learn by going after the things that y'all want us to go after. So thank you.
okay.
Is that it, sweet?